Great, so her voice there. So again, welcome everyone. I'm so excited that Passover is just around the corner, but that's why we are hosting this particular class. Holy shit, it's Passover, because this is one of the holidays where we actually have quite a bit of prep to do beforehand. And so we're going to talk a little bit this evening about how you might begin preparing your home for Passover, what to expect, and then we'll have time for any questions that might come up. Welcome to my kitchen. I decided to do this from my kitchen since a lot of the preparation that happens for Passover happens in the kitchen, but it also involves your entire home as well. One thing I think that's really important to say before we dive in is that I'm just going to be doing general education on how folks who follow a more traditional Jewish practice might get their homes ready for Passover. This is not meant to be prescriptive. It's meant to be maybe inspiring of how we can think about how we might want to get our homes, our spaces, and ourselves ready for Passover. The thing to remember, and I'll probably say this again near the end of our time together, the thing to remember is that Passover is a celebration of our freedom. We retell the story, we relive the story of the Exodus, of moving from Mitzrayim, which is translated as Egypt, but literally means a narrow place, into a place of openness, of expansiveness, moving from slavery to freedom, from oppression to liberation. And so the point of Passover is to feel the reenactment of that movement from slavery to freedom, from oppression to liberation. It's not meant to recreate constraining conditions. And so if the idea of Passover prep becomes way too much of a burden, if it's stressing you out, if it feels like it's actually sticking you into a narrow place, if it's squeezing you, then I actually think it's a moment to be like, hey, like maybe I'll actually back off a little bit. Maybe I'll choose one or two things to do to prepare for Passover. Maybe I'm not going to take on so much that it actually becomes a burden and it actually prevents me from celebrating the holiday, which is to feel the gift of freedom that we might have, even as we continue to work for more freedoms for other peoples and for the world writ large. Okay, so just keep that in mind. I don't want to stress anybody out. This is not a stress class. This is a get ready and think about how you might want to get ready for the holiday coming up. Sound good? Some thumbs up. Awesome. Great. So feel free again to pop questions in the chat as they come up. But I want to just give a basic overview of what some of the mitzvot, some of the commandments of Passover are, and how we might prepare our space to meet those particular commandments. Okay, so the focus of Passover, or at least one of the foci of Passover, is the retelling of the story of the Exodus. And a key moment in that story is when our ancestors, when those Israelites were fleeing from slavery into the desert, into the wilderness as a free people, they didn't have time to let their bread rise. And so they took their unrisen dough, they grabbed it, or they baked it really quickly, or they grabbed it, baked it later. And so therefore enter matzah, which is this kind of flat, cracker-like bread. Many of you might be familiar with it, right? Not so dissimilar to a unsalted saltine, although actually in some Jewish communities, it's a bit of a softer bread. The kind of instantiation of matzah as a tool for remembrance then translates into two particular commandments. One is that you're going to eat a lot of matzah during Passover. That's not what this class is about, but I would say actually as a way of Passover prep, going to the store and at least buying one box of kosher for Passover matzah is probably not a bad idea in the next week or so, because some stores can actually run out of it around this time of year. And the other commandment that this gets translated into is to avoid products that are leavened. So products that are leavened are called chametz, and chametz is any leavened product that is containing 5 different grains: wheat, barley, oat, spelt, or rye. It's wheat, barley, oats, spelt, or rye. And so stringent is the command to avoid those products in their leavened form that we actually just avoid those products entirely. So even wheat flour, oat flour, those are things that we're going to actually avoid, even though they're not actually quite leavened yet, because on the off chance that they could become leavened and we could consume them, we just want to not even get close to potentially eating those products. So we just cut out wheat, oat, barley, rye, and spelt from our diets completely for the 8 days of Passover. Now you might say, wait a second, Rabbi Stephen, isn't matzah made out of wheat? Yes, it is. It is in fact wheat and water mixed together. But matzah, especially that which is kosher for Passover, is produced in such a way that the ingredients are mixed, the dough is formed, it is shaped, it is baked all within 18 minutes under strict supervision. And so it is the only wheat-containing product that we are going to encounter during the 8 days of Passover. Otherwise, everything else containing those 5 grains, we are going to avoid completely. Now, there is a custom among folks, particularly of Eastern European, Ashkenazi backgrounds, to avoid another category of products as well. These are called kitniot, loosely translates as legumes, but this includes things like corn, beans, soy, rice. So this is a custom in the Ashkenazi community in particular to avoid these products in addition to chametz, for a variety of reasons. It actually emerges around the Middle Ages in France primarily, but then it spreads across the Ashkenazi community. One is that those goods were often stored in the same place as chametz, so mixing might happen. 2 is that particularly once they've been turned into flour, they resemble chametz, and so it might be really easy to mix them up. You're going to look at 2 bags, and one is, wheat flour, and one is rice flour. You can make rice flour, and those would be hard to tell apart, right? So the chance of mixing them is pretty high. Another reason is that once we take kitniot and we turn it into a product, it might look like we're actually eating a product made of chametz, right? The visual difference between, let's say, a cornbread muffin and a muffin is not great, right? Like, they look very similar, and so Ashkenazi Jews developed the custom of avoiding kitniot as well. This is why you see that special yellow capped Coke at stores around Passover, because that's actually kosher for Passover Coke. It's made with cane sugar and not corn syrup. However, if you are somebody who is choosing the Jewish community, if you're somebody who is not from an Ashkenazi and Eastern European background, so if your family's Sephardic or Mizrahi, or from another Jewish community, or particularly if you're a vegetarian, there's been dispensations from particularly Reform and conservative movements around kitniot. You may not choose to avoid those products. You might be like, look, like, I'm a vegetarian. I need tofu, right, to survive, especially if I'm cutting out other good carby products. So I'm going to choose to do that. So I will say, as somebody who chose Judaism myself, and as somebody who has a primarily vegetarian diet as a pescatarian, I choose to not cut out kitniot, just because they're such an essential part of like my core diet. And it's also because I don't come from an Ashkenazi background. I don't have that tradition, but you might choose to embrace that tradition, or you might choose to carry on that tradition, depending, okay? But really, the prohibition is around chametz. That's the universal prohibition, and again, that's wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and rye. So when it comes to chametz, there are 3 particular commandments, and these are all biblical commandments. That's why the rabbis take this so seriously. Anything that's like a biblical commandment is like, right, it is one of the ones that we're going to try to really live up to. Chametz appears in 3 particular commandments. 1 is that we don't eat it. 2 is that we don't possess it. And 3 is that any chametz in our possession, we get rid of, right? So we don't eat it. We've kind of already gone over that. Lots of matzah, lots of other alternatives, right? This has been great, kosher for Passover cookbooks and websites out there. But the preparing for Passover in particular comes in the not possessing it and the getting rid of any chametz that is in your possession. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. Any questions about anything I've covered up to this point? Lee, yeah.
Okay, a couple of silly questions, but so we shouldn't drink oat milk either?
If you're following, yeah, exactly. You don't drink oat milk. Yeah, you avoid oat milk entirely.
Okay, I wasn't sure with the leavened thing. And then I'm just kind of curious about, clearing out your home, because to me that feels very wasteful, like it'd be a flour thing. So what's the thought on that? Like, why is it necessary to clear everything out?
Perfect. So you actually are anticipating one of the beautiful rabbinic loopholes that we come up with as a way of as a way of preserving the fact that, or I should say, preserving the goods that we might have that might be wasteful to throw away, and also protecting people for whom that might actually be a huge financial burden to get rid of a lot of these products. And we'll talk about it in just a second. I see a question in the chat. Chametz is leavening. Is like sourdough starter, not baking soda. Yeah, so baking soda doesn't count because it doesn't contain one of those 5 products, which is wheat, oat, barley, spelt, and rye. Okay, those are the 5 grains. We're avoiding those. And again, the reason we get rid of them entirely is because we don't want them to accidentally become leavened within our possession. And so that's why we're getting rid of flour, for example. But we'll talk about what happens if I have like a 20-pound bag of flour. Look, this is also, I would say, this is a great chance to like go through your cupboards and be like, you know, when I got that, like, this is my classic Steven here. Like, this is like, when I got this like cornbread mix from like Trader Joe's, being like, oh yeah, I'm totally gonna make cornbread sometime. And I'm like looking at it, you know, a year and a half later, I'm like, I need to get rid of the year-and-a-half-old cornbread mix. So again, right, you're looking at things that contain wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and rye. Okay, great. Okay. Great. Okay, amazing. Another question about about getting rid of all the chametz. So let's go over this, and then we'll answer some more specific questions as they arise. So one way to get rid of our chametz is to throw it out. And so one of the things that we should do before Passover is it's really like a good spring cleaning, is to do a thorough cleaning of our house. So for most rooms, this is going to just involve vacuuming. This is a good chance to like get under those couch cushions. This is a good opportunity to like move that furniture. This is also a good opportunity, honestly, to go through your closet and like think like, what clothes can I give and like donate to, you know, charity. Right. The idea, this is supposed to be a time when we really kind of turn over our homes in ways that we may not normally when we're cleaning, because we never know where like a crumb of chametz might have found its way into a corner of our home. Again, right, this is not meant to stress you out, but I do think this is a really good opportunity to take care of our space, right? To actually say, like, the space that we live in can be treated with respect, with dignity. It can be a sacred space, right? Passover, in some ways, is about, because it's a home-based ritual, right? We're not going to synagogue. It's actually about turning our homes into a sacred space to observe this particular holiday. And so this is a moment of actually showing a lot of care for our homes by saying, like, okay, like, I haven't lifted my couch cushions in a while. And the other thing too, right, and this is where I want to kind of try to ease up the gas a little bit, is this is certainly true for spaces where chametz is likely to be found, right? You don't go overboard and like, no judgment if you eat in your bed. I'm not somebody who eats in my bed, so the chance of chametz being in my bedroom is pretty low. The chance of there being like some chips stuck between my couch cushions is pretty high, right? So I'm going to probably spend a little more time on my couch in my living room than I'm going to spend in my bedroom. And I'm certainly going to spend more time in my living room than I am going to be, like I say, my closets or bathrooms where there isn't really likely to be food. But again, I said, this is a really good opportunity to turn over your space a little bit and to treat it with care and to, again, use this as an opportunity to kind of elevate your space as like, this is, right? This is your home. This is a sacred space. Even if it's charitable, you can enlist help and absolutely enlist help from people. What do you do though with, again, this is also a good chance, as I said, to go through your cabinets and be like, okay, what's a product that I get? What's an old product? What's something that's gone bad? What's something that's expired? I also just use this as an opportunity to see like even things that aren't chametz, that like, oh, like this thing that's actually like, you know, 2 months out of date. Actually use it as an opportunity to go through my medicine cabinet as well. And I'll be like, oh, this aspirin is like, like bad a year ago. Like I should probably get rid of it. But let's say you have like a large bag of rice that would just be so wasteful to throw away, and you can't donate it because it's already opened. Or let's say you are somebody who drinks alcohol and you have like a really large scotch collection, and there are a bunch of like half full, 3/4 full bottles that would be really wasteful to throw away. Certainly you can give it away, but one loophole that we found in the rabbinic tradition is to sell your chametz. Technically, you are selling it in perpetuity, but wink, wink, the deal is that whomever we sell it to is going to give it back to you at the end of Passover. And so most communities, including Mishkan, will have a form. And so you can go onto our Passover resources website. I will send it out after this class. And you will find the form where you basically say, this chametz in my possession, I'm going to sell to a lovely person in our community, and it is no longer mine. And at the end of Passover, they say, you know what? I actually don't want it. I'm tearing up the contract. I'm backing out this deal. You can have your chametz back. Technically, if that person like wanted to come into your home and like raid your liquor cabinet, they could. But we usually choose somebody who's not gonna do that. But one thing that we want to do with the chametz that we are selling is we're going to put it in a place that is not as accessible, right? So you're not going to necessarily keep it in your pantry. So what I like to do is I will pick a cabinet somewhere in my kitchen and I'll designate that as like the chametz container, right? So I'll gather all of I made my bar cabinet, I just keep that closed anyways. And then anything that I'm keeping that I'm going to sell over Passover, I'm going to put into one cabinet. And I usually just like kind of tape that cabinet off and put a little sign on it, do not open until after Passover. And that's where the chametz lives for the duration of Passover, right? So that's something that's going to happen in conjunction with your cleaning as you go around your house, as you go through your cabinets, you take all the chametz that you're either going to throw away, you toss it, and then you take the chametz that you are keeping and you're going to put it in one place and you're going to store it there. And I like to, I think it's like a nice moment of like kind of leaning into the holiday of like doing like taping it up and putting a big X on it and be like, this is where I'm keeping it. It's kind of a less exciting version of a Christmas tree, I guess. Right? It's the do not go chametz cabinet for Passover. During the kind of search for chametz, there actually is a tradition the night before Passover to go through your house with a candle and a feather and to kind of sweep up any last bits of chametz that you might find. There's a great activity to do with friends or with kids. Sometimes, particularly for kids, I've heard of people actually like putting just like a little cracker somewhere for the kid to like sweep up. Obviously you don't want to like spread a bunch of crumbs everywhere. And then what we say that evening and the next morning is there's a formula called bitul, where essentially we say like, I did my best. Anything I didn't find, right? That like bagel crumb in the deepest recess of like my carpet under like the credenza, like it's not mine. It's null and void. I renounce my ownership of it. I've cleaned to the greatest extent possible. There is a tradition in some communities actually to even take the chametz that you're getting rid of and burning it the morning before Passover begins. This is called biur chametz. So if you go particularly to more Orthodox communities, don't be surprised if you see some like kind of those old like hibachi grills out there and people are burning chametz. And that's a way to kind of really kind of fulfill the commandment of getting rid of it. Like no, I'm not only just throwing it out, I'm getting rid of this chametz. Like it is no longer mine. Okay. So that's kind of the rest of the house. But then you get to the kitchen, and the kitchen's a little more complicated. One thing you're going to do in the kitchen is you're just going to give it a good clean anyways, right? So just clean it like you normally would. But the kitchen is where you get into the laws of kashrut, of keeping kosher, and where you encounter the idea of a lot of rabbi science, right? So when we're thinking about food, and this actually applies to the laws of separating meat and dairy as well for anybody who observes that. But generally the idea is that certain things within our tradition have kind of an essence to them, right? You almost think of it as a flavor to them that can get absorbed by the utensils or the tools that we use to cook or eat with it, okay? And this is why, for example, for people who more strictly observe the laws of kashrut, they'll have separate utensils, dishes, etc., for meat and for dairy. But we're not going to worry about that. We're going to worry particularly about chametz, right? Because we don't want chametz, and we don't even want little bits of chametz essence to get into our food over Passover. And again, this is where rabbi science comes in. The primary vector of transfer of the essence of a food into a utensil is heat. Okay, so that's something important to remember, right? And so however a object absorbs the essence of something is how we're going to get it out. Okay, so let's start with cold things, like the refrigerator, right? Anything that is going to encounter chametz in a cold form just needs to be cleaned. This is the moment to take the shelves out of the refrigerator and give it a good clean, right? But it just needs to be clean. It just needs to be wiped down, often with like a chemical cleaning agent or some good soap and water. We just need to clean it out. Because the idea, again, right, heat is a vector of transfer, cold is not a vector of transfer. So we're just getting rid of any kind of chametz that might be sitting on the surface. The same is true for, let's say if you have glasses that you might use for beer, those can be washed, cleaned out. For those things in particular, I just throw them in the dishwasher. This is a good kind of like a do your dishwasher cycle over and over again. Okay. The problem is when it comes to heat, like how do we deal with things that might absorb that chametz goodness through heat? And again, the idea is that we have to get it out in a similar manner to how it might be absorbed. So let's start with the kind of most extreme example, and then we'll work our way down. The most extreme example is going to be your stovetop, and it's going to be your oven. Because the oven gets to a very, very high temperature. So the easiest way to get your oven ready for Passover, if you're observing more traditional Passover laws, is to put it on a self-cleaning cycle or to put it at its highest heat setting to kind of burn up any chametz that might be caught in it, right? So give it a good clean, highest heat setting, or a self-cleaning cycle. And the same is true for any kind of baking implements, like baking sheets, for example. Just be careful. Sometimes baking sheets can warp and stuff if they put a really high heat. So if that's the case, you might just want to put those baking sheets away. Also, I don't know how much one bakes on Passover anyways, right? But if you're going to be using your oven, right, you put it on the highest heat setting or you put it on the self-cleaning cycle. I usually just like to put my oven on when I'm doing my kitchen cleaning and just leave it on for that, for the kind of the duration of my cleaning. I'll turn it off after that. If you have a gas stovetop, you clean it off. You turn all the burners on and you let the stovetop get very, very, very hot. You might notice that some people who are more traditionally observant will then put foil around their around kind of the openings of the range. And that's just to ensure that if there's any chametz that is stuck underneath, right, it doesn't get out during Passover. And again, there's kind of levels of stringency here. You might be like, look, a good deep clean, put my oven on cleaning cycle, turn my stovetop on, that's good enough for me. You might be like, look, I want to make my kitchen look like a spaceship, so I can put foil on everything, right? It's kind of up to you. For an electric stovetop, you just give it a good wipe down. It's technically glass, I at least love glass. So you give it a good wipe down, and you'll turn the heat on your electric stovetop to kind of burn away anything that might be stuck on it. But you're going to need your stovetop on anyways for helping you get other things prepared for Passover. Right? So then we're going to turn to the next kind of less extreme, right? And these are things that also might absorb chametz through heat, and we're going to either pour boiling water over them or we're going to immerse them in boiling water, right? So anything like that is all metal, so for example, the spoon, anything that is all metal, or let's say knives, can be immersed completely in boiling water. So you get a big pot of boiling water ready to go. Get that water to roiling boil. Everything gets cleaned. Usually it's a traditional to clean something, let it rest for a day. So this can be done maybe a day or two before Passover. So you clean it, let it rest for a day, put the boiling water on, and dip it in boiling water. I actually honestly like this is a great opportunity to like polish your utensils. Like it's like I use this like my opportunity to like get rid of all the water spots that build up like on my spoons and stuff. But again, this is a labor of love. You can do as much of it as you want and as little as you want, but anything that's metal, you boil or you dip it in boiling water. The same is true for anything like these kind of like rubber. It's like a rubber spoon, right? So I would dip this in boiling water. Wood is a challenge. Generally, wood can also be made kosher, can be koshered for Passover in this way if it doesn't have any cracks in it. If wood is super porous, has cracks in it, generally speaking, people just put that away for the duration of Passover. This might also, for somebody who is very strictly observant, this might be a problem. If you take a look here, there's a crack here, right? Kind of where the rubber and the wood meet. I can't take it apart. For my level of observance, totally fine. I'm just going to dip this in boiling water. But for somebody who's more strictly observant, they might say, look, there's no way to get this clean, right? There's this crack here, so I'm just going to put this away for Passover. Things like metal spoons, super easy there. That's kind of the dipping method. Ceramics, concrete, those kinds of materials, things that are super porous, they cannot be koshered for Passover, so they're just put away. They're just put away for Passover. This is often why people who are more traditionally observant will have dishes for Passover and dishes that they use year round. If you, like me, inherited your grandmother's china, this is a great use for your grandmother's china. Those are my Passover plates. I use them for Passover. So I'm gonna put my other plates away. Great. What are we missing here? Countertops. Missing countertops. So countertops, certainly can't dip them in boiling water. So the tradition is to clean them really well, let them rest for a little while, right? Get in these little cracks that are like between your stovetop, for example, and then to pour boiling water on them. Because this can be dangerous, because it's not possible for all surfaces, this is why you might see again in more traditionally observant households, people just cover them after cleaning them rather than pouring boiling water on them. And then folks who are super, super strict might clean them, pour boiling water on them, and also cover them as well. Just be careful. Not all countertops are made to stand extreme heat, right? So just be careful with your countertops. I think honestly, just a good clean is great. If you want to cover them, again, some people love the aesthetic of Passover, turning your kitchen into a spaceship by putting foil on everything. And for those of you who can and who want to, you can also pour boiling water on your countertops to clean those. For things like pots and pans that cannot be immersed, right? Your biggest pot, for example, you're gonna have a problem immersing that in something that's boiling. People have the tradition of letting just a little bit of the boiling water run over the sides to finish that, to kosher that. I think that is all of the surfaces and objects in this kitchen. There is a fantastic guide for those who are wanting to embrace a more traditional practice over Passover, put out by the conservative movement. It's on the Mishkan website under our Passover resources, and I will send that out as well. If you steam clean something. So that's a really good question. I have not heard of people using steam cleaning for anything other actually than the microwave. I forgot about the microwave here. So the microwave often gets koshered by folks by cleaning out the inside and then putting like a Pyrex of water into the microwave and then putting it on for about 6 minutes usually, I think is the recommended time, or at least until most of the water is boiled away. Don't let all the water boil away because that can be bad for microwaves apparently. And so that's the only steam cleaning implement that I know of is people steam clean the inside of their microwaves. Honestly, it's also just a great method for cleaning your microwave. I learned it's a good way to get all the gunk off. The steam clean method. Any other questions? Yeah, Lee.
What would you cover the counters with? Just a tablecloth that's not touched chametz, or?
Yeah, people can sometimes use tablecloths or fabric that has not touched chametz, which can be a little more challenging since we often use our tablecloths when there's bread around. That's why you'll often see people use foil because it's disposable. You're getting a new thing of foil out. And again, it's about levels of how kind of far do you want to go in your leaning into, I should say, the laws of Passover. Remember, a lot of these rituals and recommendations were developed after, right, the biblical tradition and have developed over time. You have folks who are so strict around their Passover observance that they actually get all new spices, for example, lest an errant crumb, got into one of their spices. The likelihood of a crumb getting into like your cayenne pepper is probably pretty low. But again, right, it's kind of about how much do you want to lean into this, right? For you, it might be sufficient to just give your kitchen a really good clean and be like, look, this is my reset for Passover. And for other people, they're like, no, like I really need to make sure that there is no chametz coming into contact with my food for these 8 days. So I am going to clean it and I'm going to cover everything in tin foil. Again, for some people, like that could be really nostalgic. For some people, it could be a way of really getting into the spirit of Passover through an aesthetic representation. But again, as I started tonight with, I really want folks to only lean in as much as it feels meaningful. The moment it begins to become constricting or stressful is, I think, the moment to reassess and say, is this really how I want to embrace the spirit of this holiday, which is truly celebrating our freedom?
Well, that was another question I had, is just more of the, I guess, reasons why we do this? I understand why we wouldn't eat it because our ancestors, had to leave and it's, a way to honor the story, but this just seems extreme. Or like, when we were leaving Egypt, I don't think they were worrying about their kitchens being, you know what I mean? It's like, why this specificity?
Absolutely. So generally speaking, this might not be a satisfying answer, but generally speaking, when it becomes to a Torah-based prohibition, right? So this is something that is either prescribed or prohibited in the Torah. So we're talking about owning chametz, eating chametz, or having it in your domain. The rabbis want to ensure that we don't come even close to violating that prohibition. And so the rabbinic tradition, a big part of it is to build fences around Torah-based prohibitions. And so this is actually a really good example of how those fences start to get built. I always use the example of the power substation because I think it's actually a really great visual representation. Because for traditional rabbinic Judaism, we have to get in our minds, right, of rabbinic theology. We're talking about Second Temple into post-Second Temple theology, right? Divine stuff, right? Divine substance, kind of God stuff, is really powerful and also really dangerous, right? The presence of God with the Jewish people, according to traditional theology, is what allows us to thrive. And the absence of God is when disaster strikes us. It's kind of like electricity, right? It's like a live wire, right? When channeled in the right way, it can be really productive. But when it gets out of control, it can be very destructive, right? So imagine the power substation. Electricity is contained in the wires and we insulate them, right? We put rubber around them. That's kind of the first fence because you don't want to touch the live wire. And then we put a building around it. And then around the building, right, there's usually probably a fence. And on the fence, there's barbed wire. And there's like a little gravel moat and maybe even another fence around that. And so that's the rabbinic tradition, is saying that we don't want to get you even close to potentially getting electrocuted, right? So we're going to actually create barriers to ensure that you don't even make the mistake, right, of accidentally kind of violating this prohibition. But again, because we know in our Jewish practice that these are fences, we can actually decide what feels important to us. Because we might not share the theology, right, that violating Passover is going to be disastrous for the Jewish people, right? We might take on a lighter or a different practice as a way of embracing the meaning of Passover. Again, for you, it might be sufficient to just eat matzah, because that's a beautiful way of reenacting this moment in our history. But for those of you who want to also lean a little bit into some of the traditions that have developed, right, this is kind of what this is all about. But that's why, again, you'd certainly get a different answer from an Orthodox rabbi. But for me, right, I really want us to ask the question of how much is this a way of making meaning for the holiday, and where do I actually need to draw a line because it actually becomes too stressful, it becomes a burden, it becomes not meaningful for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just wonder why specifically like chametz, like why not pineapples, or like like why is it this thing? I don't know. It's just like hard to understand the why, other than the symbolism, I
You
guess.
have to ask. You have to ask the author of the Bible. So God and or the accumulated tradition of a bunch of humans developing a story about God over time. So, and look, this is this is something that I always tell folks, particularly when I teach about kashrut, right, the laws of keeping kosher, is that foodways in particular are often arbitrary. Why do some societies eat horses and some societies don't? Right? We came up with a list of animals that are like good and not good. There's a lot of delicacies in other cultures that we would be like, oh God, you eat that? It's because, right, sometimes some choices are arbitrary. It doesn't mean that that's not meaningful per se, right? There can be a lot of meaning to holding tradition, of common identity, of shared tastes. And we might also say, like, look, like, the biblical author who wrote, the parsha that we just read this last week, Shemini from the book of Leviticus, just really hated shellfish, and I don't agree with them. I like my shrimp, right? But somebody might say, like, look, like, yeah, it is totally arbitrary, and I'm carrying on, right, a many, many, many generations long tradition. This is a way that I actually live out this part of my identity. I don't think either answer is a bad answer necessarily. Right? For some people, their Jewishness is expressed differently, but for some people, their Jewishness is expressed by leaning into. I think particularly for those of us again who don't hold a theology of like the Torah is the word of God and it is commanded to us, right? So therefore we must keep it. For those of us who see Judaism more as a living tradition, a tradition that is accumulated over time, it might be meaningful to continue to invest in those traditions. It might be meaningful to transform those traditions. That's a very reconstructionist approach to to Judaism. And
So I guess what I'm wondering about the giving up is just in my own personal experience is this question. I have celiac disease. I can't eat any of those things on the list anyway. So, how would I possibly participate in, do you know what I mean? Definitely, I mean, there's flour in my house because there are others here, so I can, but the giving up is not necessarily something that I would be participating in because I can't eat those things anyway. So I'm not sure, like, I want to think about like what's the way in, in a sense.
So I think
I can eat gluten-free matzah. I'm totally down with that.
awesome, amazing. Honestly, actually, the gluten-free matzah I had with a friend last year was actually pretty good. Matzah also gets a bad rap. Like it's like don't hate on crackers. Crackers, they're like the heroes of food. They carry dips and cheese and other delicious things to our mouths. I'm a big fan of crackers. So, anyways, I think two things. One is the way that I outlined, right? That I think this is actually a chance for spring cleaning, right? It's about thinking, what is the excess in my life at this moment? What are things that are spoiled, going bad, or that I don't use, or that somebody else could use? I think this is a really good moment for taking just a bit of an assessment of our homes. So maybe for you, Passover might, and this is for any of you, right? Passover might be like, you know what? I'm actually going to just use it as an opportunity to go through my closets, right? And actually just like look at all these clothes and really. I mean, this way, this is where like Marie Kondo is like the patron saint of Passover, because it's about right actually taking a stock of the things that we own, and expressing gratitude, right, for the abundance that we find in our lives, and also letting go of that which no longer serves us. Chametz also has a spiritual dimension to it as well, which is that it can become symbolic of all the kind of like leavened, like puffed up parts of ourselves. Like, what is it that is occupying maybe too much of your time or too much of your energy, right? That it actually has become too cumbersome or too consuming or too distracting. This is a really good moment for doing a little bit of right, cheshbon nefesh, right? Taking account of the soul is very much a high holiday activity, but I think we can revisit it this time of year as well, right? What are parts of myself that become a little too like chametz, right? Taking up a bit too much space. And I think this can be a really beautiful moment to kind of practice a bit of introspection. This is also time to think about the other kind of chametzes that take up so much of our time and energy. Is there a relationship that you've allowed to consume you or too much of your time and your energy? Is there a task, something that actually is not a necessity or value add to your life that you've become really consumed with, that's kind of puffed up too much, right? It's kind of trying to push out other things. I think this is a really good moment to assess that as well. Right, so chametz can be an actual thing, and I think it can also be symbolic. Right, if you had to set out on the road tomorrow on the path towards freedom and could only carry some things in your back, literally or metaphorically, right? Like, what would you choose to carry with you? That's kind of the Jewish desert island question. You can bring one friend and one thing, right? Like, and which is it's a good, it's not saying that you're gonna get rid of everything, right? It's a good exercise sometimes to think like, okay, like what's the matzah of my life? What is the essential? What is the foundation? And what's maybe actually become a little too puffed up and taking a bit too much space when it doesn't need to anymore.
Actually have a question about gluten-free matzah. I also can't eat gluten, so I have a similar thought to you, Anne. But on the box for gluten-free matzah, it says kosher for Passover, but then it says not to be used as a replacement for matzah at the Seder. I'm just wondering if you know more context to that.
Yeah, so that is particularly more for I'd say more strictly or traditionally observant Jews. You're also not supposed to use like, there's egg matzah as well, like matzah that contains egg in it, which is just very tasty, because eggs make many things taste better. Sorry, vegan folks. The egg matzah was actually made as to be more appealing for children, for people who are sick, or for folks who struggle to around eating, or need extra nutrition. The idea is that the matzah of the Seder plate is supposed to be like OG matzah. That said, right, this is a great example again, right? We have maybe multiple Jewish values competing simultaneously. Your health certainly takes precedent here. And so for your Seder plate, right, you should use your gluten-free matzah, because that's what you can eat. That's what you can eat safely, right? But it's more for those of us who can eat not gluten-free matzah, and there's nobody at our table who needs gluten-free matzah. It's saying that you should prioritize using kind of original matzah, if you will, in that case. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
So again, right, I asked that question there. So matzah is made out of chametz products, right? That's the great irony of matzah in the situation, is it's usually made out of wheat, but it could be made from oats, for example. And it is mixed with water, shaped and baked within a certain amount of time. It's 18 minutes under strict supervision. It is the only chametz-based product that we are eating. And the reasoning is that, again, this is a little bit of rabbi science, but the idea is that like within that period of time, it doesn't have time to leaven. So we eat it. And this is actually an interesting moment. There's a big debate within some parts of the Jewish community about, again, like where is, like kind of what's the purpose of avoiding chametz and what's the purpose of eating matzah? And so you can go out there, you can get some really, really great like kosher for Passover bagels, you can get kosher for Passover muffins, right? Like things that are made in such a way that they avoid, right, kind of the leavening, and they don't have chametz in them. They're made with other products. But the question comes is like, well, Passover, and I think ritually generally, rituals are most effective because they disrupt us, right? They disrupt our lives a little bit. They actually throw us off. They get us to pay attention to the moment. And actually the whole purpose of the Seder, right? The whole reason we're doing the Passover meal, the Seder, is to get us to ask questions so that we retell the story of the Exodus. That's why we do so many weird things at the Seder. It's to get like us thinking like, what's so different about this moment? Oh yeah, like part of our narrative is this movement from slavery to freedom. Let's retell it, let's relive it. Let's like live it as if it's our own story. And so there is a debate whether actually some of these kind of newer products for Passover that replicate things that we would normally eat are good, or if they're actually kind of distracting a little bit from the ritual disruption. I'm not going to necessarily say one is better or worse than the other, but again, that's kind of like, what is the purpose of all this? It's to give us a little bit of a disruption, and disruption's not bad, right? Shabbat services are disruption. It's not what you normally do on an evening, right? Lighting the Hanukkah candles, again, that's a disruption. It's not what you normally do. Like a disruption doesn't have to be uncomfortable, but ritual should be disruptive because it is pausing the normal flow of our lives for even just a moment to get us to notice what is around us. And in particular, during Passover, the noticing we're doing is about our ability to choose, our ability to act freely in the world, and then also noticing maybe where we are still constrained, and certainly noticing where other people are not experiencing freedom. Anne.
God. So I have a question about timing. It can be a little overwhelming as a novice to figure out when things start. And how sort of when, you've spoken a little bit about timing, but I'm wondering if you could be a little more specific, and even specific to the point of this year's dates, and just when will people be doing these things and how does that work?
Some people get started early, but the final search for chametz happens the night before Passover. The Passover starts on Monday night this year, April 22nd. So it would be Sunday night, April 21st.
Okay.
And so all of your cleaning would be done before that, right? This is the candle and feather kind of search. Yeah. And chametz is generally only eaten through about midday, the day leading into Passover. So that'd be Monday midday. So if you're like out and about getting your sandwiches and stuff, etc. But matzah is not eaten until the Seder itself,
Okay.
which would be the evening of after sundown on Monday the 22nd. And then there's a second Seder the evening of Tuesday the 23rd this year. Any other questions from folks? Great. Well, I'm really glad we had this time together. I know there's so much here, and that's again why I really want to emphasize this is supposed to be educational to allow you to make informed decisions about where you might want to lean in and where you might want to say like, look, this is actually not part of my Passover observance this year. For some of us, it might just look like doing a good clean of our homes and just avoiding chametz products through the 8 days of Passover and eating matzah. One of my traditions is like I carry my little baggie of matzah with me so I can have some for lunch and I can have some for with dinner. Other people are are much stricter or much more stringent in their observance. Some people are lighter in their observance. One of my favorite things that a co-rabbi once said is like, look, eating your bacon cheeseburger between 2 slices of matzah during Passover is Jewish observance. Might not be everybody's Jewish observance, but again, right, these are moments to embrace a little bit of difference, a little bit of disruption in our lives. And we're all going to do it in different ways based on our particular context, our needs. But hopefully this has been informative enough to help you make some choices. And again, the holiday is about celebrating our freedom, about taking stock of what we do have in our lives, about getting excited for spring and the blossoms and the budding and the change of weather, the envisioning of possibility even when it seems impossible. And so hopefully this has empowered you to do that a little bit more. And I hope you all have a really, really wonderful Passover. And any questions that come up later, feel free to send them to me. And I'll be sending out some more resources as well, but check out our resource page on the Mishkan website too. There's a lot of great stuff there. Awesome. Thanks, folks. So nice to see you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.